Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. On today's show, I have quite literally a long-lost friend on who went to the same church as I did in high school. And we've kind of fizzled out, haven't talked much, but I do know our paths split off and took pretty different directions. So I'm really looking forward to getting to talk to him today and talk about some interesting things we've learned in our adult life. So Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, John. Long lost friend back again. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. It's interesting. We caught up a little bit before we started recording, but not too much. But I want to know so much about what's going on in your life now, but I think we'll get there later. Let's rewind and talk about how did you relate to Christianity the first 18 years of your life?
Yeah, well, sort of surprisingly for where I ended up later, I didn't have like a super churchy background. You know, I'm from the South, and so obviously there's a certain amount of Christianity that just kind of seeps into the soil down here in the the good old Bible Belt. But I didn't really grow up going to church a lot. It wasn't really a significant factor or part of my life. I did at one point, go to kind of a fundamentalist Baptist school for a little while in middle school. That was crazy. But for the most part, it was all pretty normal, and I didn't think about it much until I started getting into my teenage years when I was about 16. Then I had the quote unquote, I guess, saved experience where I became sort of an evangelical Christian. I had read the Bible when I was 16, and I kind of sort of encountered Jesus sort of for the first time in reading the New Testament, and that prompted me to start identifying myself as a Christian, to be baptized, and to join my local sort of Baptist evangelical church. And after a while, I would end up, getting a little bit more zealous, and I would end up migrating to the church in the Reformed tradition where I met you, John.
Yeah, what a time that was. I remember, I don't have the clearest memory from those days, but I do remember you and I enjoying like kind of these, dare I say, pseudo deep theological conversations, which were kind of, I would assume, kind of odd for people our age to have. But I remember enjoying them. It was odd, but I remember enjoying them because we would get pretty deep into what, probably deeper philosophy than we even realized we were talking about.
Yeah, that's true. It was odd because even though, the situation we were in was very evangelical, and there's a lot of people out there that have that evangelical background, and that's very true, but it was also a little bit odder than that. Because it was kind of a very particular, unique thing. And the ambiance, the atmosphere that we were in for people of our age was unusual, where we were, thinking about things in terms of these sort of weird, esoteric, theological beliefs. And there was a lot of pressure in that direction that was just kind of, generally abnormal for, a teenager in America in circa 2010 or whenever it was.
Definitely. And like I remember kind of categorizing, I'm sure you would take this label as an honor, kind of categorizing you as a bit nerdy. And because you like to read so much, and I think that was like a thing that both you and I can share, is like there was like this heavy emphasis on reading. So we actually learned like a good amount of church history before we were even adults.
Yeah, that's true. In one way, and kind of in another way, I kind of regret those days when I think about it, because it's true. I was reading a lot, but a lot of the stuff that I really wish I had have read back then, I wasn't reading. So, like, I really had of, I wished, I think back to those days and I think, wow, instead of reading John Calvin for the fifth time, I really wish I had have read War and Peace or, Crime and
Mm.
Punishment or, all of Shakespeare, because that stuff kind of came later for me, because I didn't have that growing up. And I wish that I had have used some of that intellectual power I had at the time for other stuff rather than just going over the same stuff in the Reformed tradition again and again and again in 100 different books, saying the same thing.
Well, yes, I was going to say that is kind of the irony of it all, isn't it? You're reading a lot, but what are you reading? Basically the same way, same thing said a million different ways. I was at the time, this blows my mind now, but I was a John Owen fan.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and it's funny because I'm like, that guy, all of his writing is basically the same idea written down over and over again.
Yeah, and it's dense too. This is difficult stuff for a teenager to, I would say, be reading. I mean, John Owen, I read, the Death and the Death of Christ, I think, was one of his books that I read, and I read several others. And for people that don't know, this is a Puritan, from England, and like the 1600s. This is not an easy read.
Not at all. And like
More intellectual.
yeah, well, and that's kind of in the more reformed evangelical space. Like there are a lot of like simplified versions and such, but
Mm-hmm.
but it's all basically communicating very very Protestant ideas. And I'm sure we'll get more into that a bit later. But so I don't really know what happened after I turned 18 and went off to Bible college, and I don't really know. I remember just following each other on social media and seeing you had like either an interest in Catholicism or were becoming Catholic. So when did you decide you were Catholic?
Yeah, so I ended up converting to Catholicism in 2013. I'm not sure how long this took place after you had left the church that we were both a part of, but I basically went right from that church into the Catholic Church. It was not a fun experience doing that because there is kind of a trend in evangelicalism nowadays that, kind of this idea that evangelicals and Catholics need to be friends. And in general, evangelicals are a lot more tolerant of Catholics and vice versa than they used to be. But that really wasn't the case at the church that you and I went to, because there was a huge.
I'm laughing because you're just putting it so nicely.
Yeah, I mean, we had a yearly Reformation conference, celebrating like the foundational stuff of Protestantism, and kind of our church was defined against Catholicism in a way that not a lot of evangelical churches are anymore. Because now they're more worried about, atheism or evolution or whatever. But our church was still very much worried about Catholicism. And so in that environment, leaving and becoming Catholic was not fun, because that's basically like, well, you've just left God's camp and you've joined Satan's camp. So congratulations, welcome to hell. It's that kind of thing. So I did get officially excommunicated.
Hey, me too. I got a letter recently. Good, nice, good job.
You got it. Wait, recently?
I mean, recently for me is like a couple years ago, but yeah.
Well, it seems like they were still thinking about you, and they decided to let you know just how, I guess, unwelcome you are. Well, that's very pleasant of them.
Well, so did you get just point of clarification? Did you get like excommunicated or more? Because my letter was like basically like, we just don't recognize you as a member anymore. Like it was put very tamely.
It was tame-ish, but I was told it was a very long letter that said that I'm no longer welcome there. I'm no longer a part of Christ's kingdom at XYZ church. And yeah, I mean, it was polite. Like, it's not like they literally insulted me in the letter, but it was clear that I was really being kicked out of the church, was not welcome there further. And apparently I was told that it was announced at the church that I had left the faith and joined, along with another friend of mine that was there at the same time that did the same thing. So pretty close enough. It was they didn't just make it vicious, but it was for real.
That's awful. I have no idea if they've talked about me publicly or not. I don't really care. But that's that's kind of heartbreaking, especially because you're not leaving Christianity. You're just going to you've just converted to Catholicism, correct?
Yeah, you'd think, but a lot of people, basically, especially in the Reformed tradition that we came from, they don't really recognize the definition of Christian for them is a lot shorter or a lot tighter than what other people might think of as Christianity. So they would exclude, like Catholics, Orthodox, people they think too liberal, people that don't uphold justification by faith alone. So you would think, but I mean, for them, it was clear that, I was basically on my way to hell.
That's wow. So that's a pretty hostile environment to make a decision like that. So what was kind of going on in your head? Were you just convinced that Catholicism was more accurate? Kind of what was your personal decision? What was your thought process like as far as deciding that?
Yeah, there's some things looking back on it about that thought process. There's parts of it that I think today, like, yeah, that was a good reason. And there's parts of it that I think, maybe that wasn't such a great reason. So some of the good reasons were that, I was genuinely wanting to be able to extend Christ's love to everyone. Because, and I'm sure you've mentioned this on your podcast before, the church that we were a part of, the Reformed tradition, believes that, really Christ's love is only for a special elect group of people that Christ died for. And so I was very attracted in Catholicism to that, basically, think of the image of like Mother Teresa, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, this kind of universal love of Christ for everyone in the theology. I wanted to be able to affirm that. And I also wanted something more deeply rooted in history, more international, more diverse. Those were some of the good reasons. Some of the more maybe flawed reasons was that, there's a lot more people that leave the evangelical Reformed tradition and become Catholic than you'd probably think. And there's a lot of people in American Catholicism that are really prominent that come from a Reformed Protestant background. And kind of the reason is because in our, Reformed Protestant tradition, the Bible is where it's at, so to speak. The Bible is upheld as the infallible guide to all faith, all morals. It's everything. That's what you base your life on. That's God's word. God's not going to speak to you in a dream or in something else. You have to follow the Bible. But, the problem is there can be a lot of people in that group that start to have doubts because they start to see, well, the Bible is really hard to interpret. Or, a lot of people that want to believe the Bible, look at it and come to three totally different conclusions. And how do we know we really are interpreting the Bible the right way? Because the Bible doesn't literally audibly speak back to you. How do we know we're following this stuff the right way? And then if they dig a little deeper into church history, they might think, well, how do we even know we have the right books in the Bible to begin with? And so I kind of went down that road. A lot of people did. And so there's kind of a whole group of kind of Catholic apologetics that's aimed at people kind of going through that crisis. And basically they say, well, you have the Bible and that's great, but look, you're so confused. You don't know what it says. And basically they say, in a certain way, they substitute the church kind of for the Bible in the sense that, well, we don't really know what the Bible is saying. We need the church to tell us that. And sort of the church becomes that rock of certainty. And so at that time, I needed certainty. I wanted to believe, I wanted to know the truth. And me trying to just figure it out with the Bible didn't seem like a great plan. And I thought, an infallible church that never changes, that's got to be where it's at. And so that was a whole lot of the reason why I converted to Catholicism, wanting that certainty that could come from a church that can tell you what its teachings are, as opposed to just kind of a more passive Bible that maybe we're not even interpreting the right way.
Wow, thanks for answering that. That's super clarifying, because I can see that, in my memories of you too. Like there was like a real thirst to get to the bottom of it, right? To be like, all right, like let me square every circle. Let me, make sure this is all right. And yeah, in Reformed or even, well, Reform the Reformed branch of evangelicalism is much more like willing to do some intellectual work there than
Yeah.
like maybe mainline evangelicalism is.
Oh yeah.
So it makes sense that you can kind of have a progression from, oh, Jesus is cool. Wait, what? How does this make sense? And then you keep going down that line, and eventually you kind of get to the church that says, "Listen, we're old. We've been at these questions for a while. We've got it. That kind of makes sense. Am I hearing your story correct there?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly like that. Yeah. Definitely I'm a very intellectual person. That's just the way God made me. That's just how I am. And so I would have never fit into an evangelical environment that had the brain in completely an off position. That's why I had to leave my original more Baptist environment and go towards a reformed environment to begin with, because I think you would probably say it's fair to say that they are the more intellectual side of the evangelical church.
Well, if nothing else, they're convinced. If nothing else, they're convinced they are, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, they at least they pride themselves on the bookishness, and that was good for me because that's what I like. But I didn't kind of just stop. I kept going, and that got me in trouble. And then I keep going, and I keep going, and I keep going, and it just keeps you think too much after a while. It's like I wasn't ready to just kind of stop at some place. I just kind of kept following where my thoughts were leading me, and I kept kind of trying to tease things out to their logical conclusion.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So you correct me if I'm wrong. You still identify as Catholic, correct?
Yes, I am a Catholic. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. I affirm those things, but I've had a hard journey. And I've had to ask a lot of hard questions about the viability of faith. Specifically, like my pet issue is, about the confronting what I think are, the crimes and bad actions committed by Christianity, historically. And so I've really had to wrestle with my faith and with who I am. For my own part, I believe in a future for humanity and Christianity, where Christianity embraces, sustainable, just, tolerant, and humanistic values. Because I think that is, in fact, what ultimately flows from Jesus' message. And I want to work towards that. A particular passion of mine is my belief in universalism, which is the idea that ultimately everybody will be saved and there's no such thing as an eternal hell of torture and damnation. That's just one example. But so yes, I'm a Catholic. I affirm that. I believe in Jesus Christ, but I believe in a Catholicism and in a Christianity that's good and just and tolerant, and I'm trying to work towards that in my own way, small way.
Cool. Well, honestly, due to your caveats, I can vibe with you better. You know what I mean? Because I think it's unfortunate. It kind of cuts both ways, but because our language and our culture is ever so simplistic when it comes to labels, it's kind of like, I mean, even when I was studying to be a pastor, I didn't like it when people would ask me, "Am I a Christian?" and I had to say yes. Like there was like this burden I felt by saying
exactly.
yes. And so I appreciate you saying yes, but ... That's actually like shows something to me that is more enjoyable to be around than the alternative.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I look at it is, I mean, I appreciate, that we have to have labels and we have to tell things about ourselves. But I mean, when I hear someone, if I'm a Catholic and I hear, okay, this other person is a Catholic. So if you were Catholic and that's the only thing I knew about you, that literally tells me nothing about how I think our values match up. Because, just from my personal experience, I connect with, I have more in common with somebody from a completely different religion that's working for a just, a tolerant, a peaceful world than I do with somebody in my own tradition that's a fundamentalist, that's paranoid, that's angry, or what may have you. So I also am kind of, I kind of cringe at the labels a little bit, because the label Catholic is important, but it's not as important as my sort of, my humanistic values. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. So as far as how you view your faith and spirituality now contrasted to when you were younger, is it just where your values are? Would you say that's the biggest contrast?
Oh boy. Well, it's more than just values. I mean, it's also a lot about the mindset. I mean, back in the days that that we knew each other, I think it's perfectly fair to characterize me as a zealot. Somebody that was in the wrong way. Somebody who was kind of an extremist. I look back on myself in a lot of those earlier times, and my beliefs were often verging on the fanatical. So, and I expressed my faith in ways that was confrontational, that was, sometimes mean spirited. And of course, I'm picking that vibe up sometimes from people around me, but, ultimately the buck stops with me. And so the changes between me now and then are really kind of just a change in the type of values, that I believe in, but also just kind of in my personality. I had to go through really hard experiences to get more sympathy for other people, to understand other people's perspective, and just to get a little bit more humble. So all of that's kind of a painful, pruning process. I guess it's all about that's the process of, I guess, trying to grow up and trying to be wiser than you used to be. So my faith now is a much more, sort of skeptical, grounded kind of emphasis on what I think is good, as opposed to a more sort of dogmatic approach to things.
Wow. Well, thank you for being so vulnerable. It's never fun to admit how ugly our past is, and
Oh yeah.
I have to do it often, and it can be rather painful. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. I'm already very much enjoying where you've landed. It's making my heart kind of happy, because again, like, it's been a decade or so since I've
Right.
talked to you, so it's cool to see where that you've landed where you have. It makes me pretty happy.
Oh, well, thank you for saying so. Yeah, I've had a lot of really painful moments where I've had to look and kind of recognize how bad, past actions, were. Because there's been times when I've ran into other people that there's been a similar space and time since we've last talked, like the one between you and I, like people that knew me back then. And, they talked to me, and I realized, I was an absolute jerk, or I just, badgered them. And there's even been people I've met that I realized, they were way better off before they met me back then, because I've even, found, recognized that there are certain people from when I was younger that, I influenced for the worse, and would have been just better off if I hadn't have ever influenced them at all. And that is really painful to recognize. And so I try not to do that.
Well, good on you. I mean, recognizing it is obviously a very important first step. And yeah, it's something I've also, I have to cringe at the effect I've had on others. And I think but I think it's almost beautiful, right? To be able to like comprehend that, because if you couldn't comprehend that, it probably means you wouldn't be even worried about how your behavior impacts others now. And obviously you and I are very concerned about how behavior impacts
I couldn't agree more.
certain people.
Absolutely.
Let's get into some of the fun stuff, shall we? Because I'm very familiar with Protestantism and evangelicalism, but less so Catholicism, only kind of in an academic sense. I have been to Mass. I used to go to evening Mass when I was at Bible college, just for something different. And I know the basics, but I think you'll definitely have kind of the academic and personal knowledge to bring to this conversation better than I can. This might be a weird way to start, but I think one of the easiest ways to talk about Catholicism is actually kind of to talk about Protestantism first. So you and I both know this, but I'm sure you could articulate it better. When did the Protestant movement begin?
Yeah, so Protestantism began in Western Europe in the 1500s. There was a time in which Western European culture through the Middle Ages was basically entirely Catholic, and through that time period, there was a lot of people and a lot of movements that kind of wanted to see the Catholic Church change in a variety of different ways. Protestantism was one such movement, but it's kind of a movement that stuck, as it were. So the defining kind of person and event, with Protestantism is a German monk and originally a Catholic priest, Martin Luther, who sparked the Protestant protest movement. and it started spreading out from Europe across the 1500s from there. So originally Protestantism primarily consisted of, originally followers of Martin Luther, his Lutheran followers, and followers of the French reformer John Calvin. And they emphasize, things like scripture alone, faith alone in salvation. But, gradually, Protestantism sort of becomes like an onion. It just kind of has different layers beneath it, because Protestantism prides itself on, the believer's right to interpret scripture for himself. And that has led to a lot of different expressions and their own angles on Protestantism, so that a lot of different denominations and Protestant traditions formed in Europe and America over the past, 500 years. You go all the way to something like, Pentecostalism or Protestant churches can look very different from each other because there's been so much evolution over that 500-year period since the Protestant Reformation started. But the key bedrock foundations of Protestantism are generally that emphasis on the Bible being our guide to the faith, and the belief that, a believer approaches Christ, not through a priest, not through a church, but through himself personally, in the emphasis on salvation by faith alone. But Protestantism is one of those things that the more it morphs, the more it changes, it can start to sort of be difficult to apply one label to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good job. Martin Luther and John Calvin are definitely the two biggest figures to know. Because, before, you're right. There had been movements and sects of Christianity that looked kind of different, but in general, there was Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Church. After the schism, that was kind of it.
That was pretty much
umbrellas. It. And so, you would have little different groups that came out throughout history, but the Protestant movement is if you're wondering why do we have 100+ denominations in the U.S., it is because of the spark of Protestantism is what really started everything. And what were some of the things Martin Luther was reacting to?
Yeah, a lot of different things. So the initial impetus was the Catholic Church in the place and time where he was at in Middle Germany and Saxony in the 1500s, selling kind of religious favors, kind of the church being overly greedy. But people also wanted a church that was more ethically just, because there was a lot of corruption in the church at that time. People were concerned about the ways in which the Catholic Church was promoting superstition. At that time, there were a lot of I'll use the word cult, a lot of cults of the saints. There was a lot of superstition about various saints and about relics of the saints. And there was kind of a longing for, we have maybe drifted too far away from what the message of Jesus was supposed to be. And we need to get away from all these extra things that have kind of, the Pope, the this, the that have kind of clinging to the biblical message and preventing us from seeing Jesus. So it was this desire to sweep away the things they thought that Catholicism had introduced that they thought were extra.
Yeah. Yeah, the indulgences was definitely kind of, if you will, the headline. But yeah, there. I think just culturally there was this sort of, there's people are slowly becoming more literate. People are, being able to kind of not depend on hierarchies and leadership as much as they used to have to. And so I think it was kind of a good setting for something that's a little more, at least appears a little more like anarchy. I think there was an appeal, a cultural expectation for something like that to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, nothing comes out of the blue. Everything is always going to be contained within kind of the culture that it's in. And Protestantism, it was the reason why it had its success is because the time was sort of ripe as Europe was transitioning out of the Middle Ages. And people were, like you said, becoming more literate. There was a rise of a merchant class that was less, bound to the medieval lord and peasant dynamic. And Protestantism was kind of fit for the changing times, as it were.
Definitely. Another thing you brought up is the Pope. So this question will probably help get us going on some of that topic. So what is the Catholic view of the origin of church? And can you contrast that with kind of more Protestant ideas of how the church started?
Oh yeah, so the Protestant and Catholic ideas of the church are very, very, very different, and in fact, that's kind of maybe the crux of some of their differences. So, standard Catholic idea: Catholics believe that the church was founded by Jesus Christ Himself personally, and that Jesus would have founded the church. He would have set up its core structure and ordained its leadership. And so, for Catholics, there's this personal touch of that the church today is a continuation, of the church that was founded by Christ. The Pope is the person who the Catholic Church believes is the main head honcho, so to speak, over the church. Catholics believe that Jesus' main disciple, Peter, was the first pope, and that the popes are all in a line of succession coming from Peter. And the church has a lot of authority. It has the authority of Christ itself, and it has sort of an official, defined international structure. Very different from a Protestant understanding, because Protestants, I think their idea of church starts with just their local church. That's just church to them, the local communal assembly of believers. Protestants are a lot less likely to think of the church in international transhistorical terms in the way Catholics do. Protestants kind of tend to have a mentality that, if there's three people that are together loving Jesus, that's the church. The church is wherever the people are. Catholics don't really think of it that way. The church is wherever the structure that Jesus established is, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. You could almost sum it up like, for the Catholics, the church is the building to some extent. Not literally, of course, but there is like a very structural nature to Catholic Church that, Protestants, it's kind of all over the place. Certainly, there's more liturgical and more structured versions of Protestantism. But they don't have the same kind of explicit hierarchies that the Catholic Church does.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And if not the building, then at least, the hierarchy itself kind of can define the church in Catholicism.
Yeah, and so for them, literally the current pope is in not like bloodline succession, but in a almost spiritual succession of Peter. Is that accurate to say?
Absolutely, yes. The Pope is considered the successor of St. Peter. He's considered to sit on the throne of St. Peter, exercise the authority of St. Peter. There's a lot of symbols about Peter that are associated with the Pope, and generally the Pope's ministry is called the Petrine ministry after Peter. So yes, absolutely.
Gotcha. Here's something I wasn't planning on asking you, but I just popped into my head. Protestants don't usually talk about the saints, so to speak, right? Because we would just say Peter. We wouldn't typically, I'm still Protestant, but they, I can't say they for both, but people from Protestant backgrounds, like, typically they'll go, they'll just say names: Peter, Mary, whatever. But there's sort of like an honor bestowed, I think veneration, you would say, towards certain characters in church history. Can you speak more to that?
Oh yeah, Catholics love their saints. So in Catholicism, there's a huge emphasis on sharing in Christ's ministry and in His life, and maybe this is something that is a little bit more of a positive aspect of Catholicism. In the Protestant background, Jesus is way over there and we are way over here, his humble followers. And while that's certainly true in terms of like Christ's divinity, Catholicism tries to talk about our sharing in His mission a lot more viscerally. And so there's even this idea in Catholicism that saints are sort of metaphorically an alter Christus, another Christ, somebody whose Christ's power and ministry flows through in a powerful way. And they're kind of conduits, as it were, for Christ's life. And so there's kind of a Protestant saying that, the only two arms Jesus has in the world right now are yours. Catholicism takes that really literally, that Christ actually works through the saints. And so the saints deserve honor and they deserve to be our objects of emulation, because they show what Christ working through a human being looks like. Now, Protestants, especially in like the more traditional Protestant traditions, they get really scared with that because it sounds a lot like maybe worshiping a human being or putting them on a really, really high pedestal. But it's hard to get away from that completely because people really need heroes. It's a natural human emotion to emulate people. So, I mean, the ways that Protestants look at certain people, especially in our tradition, the tradition we were in, like John Calvin and Martin Luther, it's not really that different from the way Catholics would look at a saint. So sometimes the differences can be over exaggerated, but saints have that official sort of liturgical role in the Christian life for a Catholic. In the Catholic mindset, a saint is the good angel on your shoulder. They're an active part of what they view the Christian life is.
Yeah. I really want to start going on tangents about like spirituality and mysticism right now, because I think that actually plays into that point very directly. But I'm going to move on and maybe we'll circle back to that. One of the biggest differences also that's easy to spot, how do Protestant and Catholic Bibles differ, and how does the interpretation process work differently between Catholics and Protestants?
Yeah, the interpretation differences are bigger than the Bible differences, but the Bible differences are there because Catholics and Protestants have a different Old Testament, as it were. Or I should say, everything that's in the Protestant Bible is in the Catholic Bible, but the Catholic Bible has a few extra books in the Old Testament. Frankly, I think Catholics make a much bigger deal about this than it actually is. I mean, yes, there's differences. Differences are important, but it doesn't really constitute the heart of the matter. And the New Testaments between Catholics and Protestants are the same. They're identical. There are multiple different Catholic modern English translations of the Bible, and it's not at all unusual to see Catholics, even in an official, sort of church context, using traditional Protestant, versions like the NIV.
Sorry to interrupt, but before we get into that, just so my memory is correct, because it might be curious to someone less familiar with the Bible. Like, you're right, it's only Old Testament, the Apocrypha, as it's called sometimes, and it's the story of the Maccabees is in there. Mm-hmm. What else do they have that the Protestant don't?
So there's First and Second Maccabees. There's the book of Judith. Right. Two books have extra portions to them. So the Catholic versions of the book of Daniel and the book of Esther are longer. And then there's the book of Baruch, the book of Wisdom, and the book of Sirach. So basically Sirach and Wisdom are a lot like Proverbs. Baruch is more like a prophetic book. And Judith, and I forgot Tobit. Judith and Tobit are more like Jewish folk tales, similar to, kind of like fables, Esther. Kind of like similar to Esther, exactly. And then the Maccabees is a historical account of events that took place in Israel in the Hellenistic period, events which are actually the originating of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah.
Right. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting that they're different because they don't really need to be, as far as I can tell. Like, the content is not super, like, to me, there's nothing from my memory of reading the Apocrypha, I was like, none of this seems to like destroy Protestantism by any means. It seems pretty consistent with the rest.
Nothing too crazy. There are some things in there that early Protestants, did not like, that they thought showed things going in too much of a Catholic direction. For instance, the Maccabees does portray people praying for the souls of the dead, which is something that Catholics do and Protestants don't. But at the same time, it's nothing that sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for taking the time to go through that. I just know not all my listeners are as familiar with the Bible, so it's good to kind of be like, there's some differences, but this is not the issue between Catholics and Protestants, I wouldn't say.
Right.
But you're correct to say it's a lot about interpretation.
Right, yeah. So you'll never flip to one of those. There's no portion of those Catholic books of the Bible that says, by the way, Catholicism is true. There's nothing like, sticks out like that. But The interpretation, yeah, is pretty serious because Catholics, the Catholic idea is that interpretation first and foremost belongs to the church. So in interpreting difficult passages of scripture, at least a traditional Catholic, the first thing they're going to say is, what does the church say? What has the church taught about this? What have the saints said? Meanwhile, a Protestant is more likely to either say, what do I think? Or what do the people immediately around me think about this? Protestantism can kind of interpret things more on the fly. And again, things are going to be very different, across different types of Protestant churches. But interpretation is a much more of an individual existential effort as opposed to Catholicism. Things are rooted in the authority of the church. And frankly, Catholics look to the church for the church teaching. They don't really dig around in the Bible for answers in a lot of the same ways that Protestants do.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's almost like on paper they're miles apart, but then in practice it almost works out kind of the same way. I will say, yeah, there's a bit more, I think they would say the Holy Spirit grants you Protestants would say that the Holy Spirit grants you the power to be able to interpret properly. So if you don't have the Holy Spirit, you're probably not interpreting properly. I've heard that a lot.
Right.
Don't really know what that means, but I've heard it a lot.
It's impossible to verify.
Right. Yeah, and Catholics, yeah, I mean, there's a joke that oh, I'm Catholic, I've never read the Bible. That's kind of the joke that comes out of it. But yeah, so you could not. Most Catholics would certainly frown upon someone just coming up with an interpretation and posting a blog about it, that especially if it was antithetical to what the church has taught. Whereas Protestants might be like, well, that's wrong, but it's not wrong because they're violating the church teaching. It's wrong because of some other reason we're going to make up.
Yeah, generally.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, so, and then this probably also manifests in, what are some of the differences in clergy?
Oh, that's a big difference too. That's one of the more noticeable differences because, I mean, by and large, in most Protestant churches, the pastor or the preacher or whatever title he uses in the Protestant church of record, he's just kind of one of us. He's sure you probably respect him a lot. You sure you look up to him, but fundamentally, the pastor in the Protestant church is one of us. He usually has a family that worships there in the church with him. Sometimes he came from a career that, and maybe he'll go back to that if this whole preaching deal doesn't work out. He's one of us. But Catholicism has a more stark difference between the laity, the regular folk, and the clergy, the priest. Becoming a priest in Catholicism is, it's really serious business. It involves in the Roman Catholic Church, taking a vow of celibacy to never marry. They're usually visibly set apart by wearing, priestly garments that identify them as priests. And there's an idea in Catholicism that, priests have, as it were, a sacred power. That sounds probably sounds a little crazy from a Protestant perspective to hear, but in Catholicism, priests receive a sacred power through being ordained, that same power that Jesus gave to his apostles that kind of flows through them. And they have a power to forgive sins in Christ's name, to consecrate the Eucharist, and to serve as Christ's representative in the church. So he's not just another one of us, so to speak. There's something that marks out the priest as different. And it's not ultimately about him. It's not that he read a bunch of books. It's not this. It's that power that comes through the sacrament of holy orders, the sacrament of ordination, that sort of puts the priest, for most Catholics, in kind of a different league.
Yeah. And I would say most I mean, there's certainly, the problem with evangelicalism is it's kind of become a very broad umbrella, but would say you have to be ordained to be a pastor, and then they'll kind of spiritualize talk about the ordination, the laying on of hands, or whatever they do. There's usually an element of kind of divine authority that they claim, but it's quite different than the methodology that Catholics use in their clergy, where it's a very serious matter that they're like, yeah, like you said, there's a certain level of sacredness and sacrament that has to take place in order for that kind of divine right.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just like turning up the knob a couple notches of that divine authority, and it's even more so when you talk about bishops. And for people that don't know, so basically, the Catholic Church there's sort of a two-tier structure. There's your local bishop, your local priest at whatever local Catholic church, but bishops is sort of the higher order of the clergy. So every priest is a priest serving under a bishop. And in Catholic sort of theology, the bishops are the sort of the successors of the apostles, as it were. And so a bishop has even more authority because, in a sense, a priest's authority is very much constrained by his bishop. And every local area, generally has a bishop over it. There's an archbishop of Atlanta. There's, an archbishop in New York. There's an archbishop of Los Angeles. And bishops are generally answerable only to the head bishop, which is the Pope.
Yeah, so it's like a very detailed hierarchy, and like in some ways it kind of it just distributes the power lower the farther down you look, but obviously has the inverse effect where the Pope has a lot of power over the church.
Oh yeah, the Pope has basically unlimited power over the church. There are very few things that the Pope cannot do.
We'll go back to contrasting in a minute, but just out of my own curiosity, how do you feel about that hierarchy structure personally?
Yeah, well, it has its pluses and it has its minuses, or its negatives. A plus would be that structure, is a lot of the reason why Catholicism is still, after 2000, after this long period of time, is still here, still a driving force in Western culture, still the largest religious institution on the planet. All these, Catholicism probably wouldn't have survived without that hierarchy, across so many centuries of conflict and just all kinds of terrible, the Black Death, whatever the case might be. So it makes things, efficient, and it makes things work sometimes in that respect. The downside is, well, exactly what you would think it would be for giving people too much, power. There can be abuses of power. It's not at all democratic. It can, lead to a situation in which people don't have a say over the church, at all. So there are a lot of negatives to it. Our current Pope, Pope Francis, is somebody who does see a lot of negatives to that power structure and has tried to reform it and spread the power out a little bit more broadly, and to bring the laity into it. That would probably be where I am. I'm a big fan of Pope Francis, and I don't think the church should get rid of its structure, because that's one of the things that makes it what it is. But we need to reform that structure to make it more compatible for a democratic age, and to make sure that the kind of abuses that were allowed, that, sort of started the Catholic sex scandal, can't happen again. And that's not going to be the case unless there's some fundamental reforms to how the church, operates, to make it more democratic and put some checks and balances in there.
Yeah, in some ways, like, your average non-denom church goes through the same, possible problems with abuse and power troubles that the Catholic Church does. The difference is the scale, right?
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
In your microcosm, way worse things can happen that might go, the problem is maybe the secrecy, maybe the, you're not on anybody's radar because you're a small church, so you can get away with more and be held less accountable. But you might be able to not only do so much damage, whereas the Catholic Church, it's pretty hard to get away with anything for too long. Eventually it'll be found out because it's so big, but it's going to cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Catholic Church is so big, it's in so many different countries, that when things go wrong, it can have ripple effects, literally over the entire world.
Yeah. So let's go back to some of the differences, though, between Protestants and Catholics. Are there any? I know there are. So what are some of the differences between how these groups view the afterlife?
Yeah, those differences can be sometimes pretty big as well. So the standard evangelical idea, again, if you ever say all Protestants, all evangelicals believe X, it can never be true because there's always going to be diversity. But by and large, most evangelicals believe that if they accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, they're going to heaven when they die, and well, that's pretty much it. Salvation is kind of just assured, and we're going right up there. Catholics don't exactly have that idea. Part of the reason is because Catholics put your works and your actions as a bigger factor in salvation than Protestants do. And that's a foundational difference because that's one of the things that was that the Protestant Reformation was about. Protestants assuming that salvation is by faith alone, and Catholics assuming that salvation is by faith and works together. That has proved to be a pretty intractable conflict because there's many parts of the Bible that seem to be saying both of those things. So it's very hard to resolve. But the Catholic idea is, for one, Catholics have a concept of a completely different place, purgatory. That has a very doom and gloom kind of word to it. And part of that is justified because many Catholics have kind of made purgatory out to be an incredibly scary place. But Catholics emphasize more your actual moral purity. So there's the idea that we have to, we're probably not going to be ready to go to heaven when we die because we're not perfect yet. We're still flawed. We're still sort of have all these issues that are wrong with us. And so purgatory is kind of put in there as this place where you go to get sorted out and be ready for heaven after this life. But Catholics, think that this might be a real trial. And so for Catholics, it's like at death, there's still work to be done, most likely. As opposed for Protestants, for many of them, once you've accepted Jesus as your savior, that's it. You're really just kind of waiting to die so you can go to heaven in a certain sort of way. As opposed to Catholicism, there's going to have to be a lot of effort to get you to heaven, so to speak.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, technical word, sanctification. Do Catholics generally believe sanctification is after death or during life?
Both. Yeah, very much both.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's salvation is just a process that starts now and ends once you finally get to heaven, but not necessarily when you die. It's going to continue on until you are like Christ, until you're perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, as it were.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I don't, views on the afterlife always kind of crack me up. Like you alluded to earlier, you're a universalist. I'm a who knows kind of guy. I'm like, does it matter? Like I can't know. And so, yeah, that's afterlife's always a little tricky, but yeah, you're right. Like, and Catholics don't actually, they acknowledge hell as a place, but they don't quite emphasize it the way that Protestants and evangelicals do.
Well, it really depends because there's a lot of groups or little cliques in the Catholic Church in America, particularly where hell does have a massive, it's there massively. And there used to be a lot of stereotypes about sort of Irish Catholicism was obsessed with hell. You see that in sort of the novels of James Joyce, like the Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, where this obsessive fear of hell kind of is over him. So hell can definitely be very visible in some parts of Catholicism, and historically that's very much the case. But the thing is, the recent popes, the last 4 or 5 popes, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict XVI, Pope John Paul II, have had extremely optimistic views of humanity's salvation. They haven't been necessarily out and out total universalists, but they very much left that door open and have emphasized the universality of Christ's mercy, the fact that non-Christians can be saved. Pope Benedict went so far as to say that the vast majority of humanity would be saved. And so all of that has kind of had the effect of lessening the importance of hell in Catholic life. But at the same time, it's still very much there. And among more conservative Catholics, it can be a very, very scary and very active force.
Gotcha. Thank you for that clarification. That's actually very helpful. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the differences. There's obviously some basic commonalities, right? Like they both worship Jesus, right? Like that's like
Yeah.
probably the thing to emphasize the most. They don't both believe in a virgin birth in general. There's they both believe in a literal resurrection.
Yes.
There's some fundamental things, specifically when you get back to the originator of Christianity, if you will, Christ. Whether he meant to or not is up for debate, but but he is certainly the commonality between Catholics and Protestants. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There, you can use the very, very famous phrase of C.S. Lewis, "Mere Christianity." This Catholics and Protestants, they are in the same religion, and there is a foundational, fundamental agreement that they have about a lot of those key issues. Most importantly, that the defining element of Christianity, they both believe that Jesus Christ is God and man, and is the savior of humanity, and that he died on a cross, rose again. Those the idea of the Trinity, the incarnation. There's going to be that huge commonality, and it's important to emphasize that because it is possible to make too much of the differences, and it's also possible to make too little of the differences. But foundationally, this is two sides of the same coin. This is two, different theological, cultural, historical expressions of one underlying religious belief, the belief in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and this is stuff we would have, they would have in common with Eastern Orthodox and basically anything under the Orthodox Christianity umbrella.
Oh yeah, I'll try not to go on a tangent here because I love Orthodoxy. I love Eastern Orthodoxy, but the commonalities between Catholics and Orthodox are very, very, very high, much higher than the commonality between Catholics and Protestants. And frankly, in my own sort of personal opinion, the majority of the things that people uphold as differences between Orthodox and Catholics aren't even really actual differences at all when you look closely. So there's a really strong commonality between Catholics and Orthodoxy, so much so that it is very much conceivable that within our lifetimes, at least some aspect of some element of Orthodoxy could, be reunifying with the Catholic Church under some guise. So there's a lot of deep commonality there.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see because we're talking about basically, a grand 1,000 years of beef and it would be very interesting. There have been moves for a repaired relationship there, so it's very fascinating.
Yeah, the in fact, in the current crisis, the current war between Russia and Ukraine is speeding up that process because there's kind of a separation in the Orthodox world now between the Russian Orthodox Church and many of the other Orthodox churches. And the effect of that is that some of the other Orthodox churches are drawing, as they draw away from the Russian Orthodox Church, are drawing closer to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it turns out. So obviously we can't talk about all the differences and all the history of Protestantism and Catholicism, or else we'd be here for 600 years. But on a scale of 1 to 10, let's do it this way. 1 being like completely different religions, and 10 being the exact same thing. How would you rate the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism?
Probably a 6. I mean, there's real substantial differences, not only in terms of how things look, but in terms of how you think, feel, act, and are in the world as a Christian under those two different guises. But still, that fundamental, you're still sort of you're standing in the same place, as it were, but you're inhabiting two different modes of being and of how to be there.
Yeah. I think I am almost completely in agreement with you. I don't think I would challenge that at all. I even as a young, even in the church you and I attended, I really hated the Catholic hating because it didn't make any sense to me, because I was I was just perceiving, I was like, these are Christians, right? Like the rhetoric you and I heard certainly made it sound like, now granted, this is not most evangelicals, but I've
Right.
actually heard from a lot of people in like evangelical colleges that supposedly welcome Catholics, that Catholics are kind of othered by evangelicals and Protestants a lot. And that was certainly the case in the church you and I went to.
Yes, I would love to be able to say right now that I was revolted by the anti-Catholic rhetoric that we saw there, but in fact, I was not. I was very much cheering it on. I was whole hog for that up until the time that I started to have doubts about it. But yeah, very very much so. I agree.
Yeah, and no shame on you. You were young, dude. You know, it's I think the reason it bothered me, some of my closest friends were Catholic, and I even told the leadership of that church once. I was like, I'd be more comfortable inviting an atheist here than a Catholic, like, which I just thought was such an interesting juxtaposition. Now, in retrospect, I'm like, I should have been comfortable inviting any person there, so that's pointing like a pretty serious problem. But yeah, I think at a lot of churches there's sort of this attitude of, oh, the Catholics, they're the ones who like worship Mary and suck on incense or whatever they think, and so like they don't. I think there's like this really like there's almost this ignorance towards it, I guess.
Yeah, well, there's this really there's this habit in very very common, very very prevalent from the top down in evangelicalism that basically the word Christian means conservative evangelical Protestant, but that is like 9% of, don't quote me on that. It's like a small fraction of what Christianity is worldwide. Because I forget the exact statistic, but I think Protestants themselves are only about 35, maybe 37% of what Christianity as a whole makes up, and of that, conservative evangelicals are an even smaller piece.
Last I checked, it was 6%. Yeah.
Yeah, there's almost no awareness in contemporary American evangelicalism that Christianity is way, way more different and diverse than that. And Catholics and Orthodox are even together make up over 50% of Christianity. And you wouldn't know it from a lot of evangelical discourse. And, a lot of, and I'm not necessarily critiquing them for this because everybody has a right to do their own thing, but a lot of Protestant missionary work actually is going to just Catholic and Orthodox countries. And there's not really an awareness to them that, they kind of just assume, all those people are lost. There's not really an awareness that most of those countries have had some version of Christianity very, very, very much a part of their culture for hundreds and hundreds and sometimes thousands of years.
Yeah, it's certainly a very narrow view. Do you think evangelicals are even aware that, one, they're Protestant by nature, or two, how complex the evolution of church and the Christian faith has been?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Because just my experiences are just my own, but sometimes when I talk about the diversity of church history and things, you can get some shocked expressions. I think from evangelicals in America, there's not a whole lot of emphasis on anything that would be conducive to learning about the church history or the complexity of Christianity in today's world, which is just growing more complex, just growing more diverse. I think, the evangelicals tend to think that Christianity is a whole lot more monolithic than it is, or just to assume that people that don't do it their way are just kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's purposeful, personally. I think that's bred in. Because, if you start looking at church history, it doesn't exactly make you excited to go to church, to be honest.
It definitely does not.
Well, it's not grabby, it's really fun to kind of, like you were alluding to earlier, like turn your brain off, and like kind of have a break from the complexity of life. And I think that's something that's very appealing about evangelicalism, is how freaking simple it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a huge draw. So it might be kind of a willful ignorance, if you will, to be like, listen, I don't want to think about this, because if I do, I won't have this comfort anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's there's certainly a truth to that. Many people have commented that, Christianity sometimes struggles to simplify itself. So a lot of people talk about, in the developed world, kind of Christianity in places where it competes with Islam. Islam is a lot more easier to understand in certain ways, in the sense that a lot of its more fundamentals can be explained so easily, as opposed to Christianity. There's not a single Christian ever that has ever not struggled with explaining the Trinity, which is supposed to be the foundation of the faith. And so evangelicals are, I think, very good at, in spite of that, finding a way to make Christianity sort of easier to understand and sort of just, not as intellectually complex.
Yeah, I mean, evangelicals are really great at not even talking about the Trinity unless it's helpful, but which it frankly rarely is, as far as in convincing anyone of anything. But they're great at emphasize at their Christology, at just emphasizing Christ and not worrying about the Father and the Holy Spirit so much, or
Right.
being like, yeah, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New, say stuff like that. Um, yeah. So, but here's a question, because well, first I'll ask this question because you might have a different perspective than I on this. Do you think Catholics are just as exclusionary as evangelicals, or no?
Well, in practice, they can be. Institutionally, it's a little bit more difficult. What I mean is that, yeah, in American Catholicism is very conservative. So if you're talking about Catholicism worldwide, the American Church is a part of the Catholic Church that's always trying to push a more conservative um, mindset out there. And part of that has to do with the fact that America is more religiously conservative as a whole, and because of the ways that evangelical Protestants have actually begun to influence American Catholics. But so there can be a lot of very, very exclusionary teaching, praxis, and ideology in the American um, Catholic Church, especially when it begins to intersect with politics and sort of the American political religious structure. Institutionally, though, it is sometimes a little bit harder because, again, the Catholic Church is an international organization, and a lot of the people at the top of the Catholic Church in the hierarchy, especially in the Vatican surrounding the Pope, try to emphasize a much less um, exclusionary mentality. And so a lot of American Catholics with a more conservative mindset have been really undermined by the leadership of the church, like Pope Francis, emphasizing a more open sort of mentality. So a famous example of this is not long after Pope Francis was elected as Pope. He was on a plane. He was asked about gay marriage or gay couples, and he responded by just saying, who am I to judge? Really famous remark, and that kind of thing undermined, it undermines the ability of Catholics to be exclusionary or exclusive as they sometimes would like to be. So I remember when this happened, there were a lot of churches that around here that I went to that the priest would say, now the Pope didn't really mean that, yada, yada, yada. So there's this institutional pressure, especially under Pope Francis, for the church to be more open, more loving, less exclusive in that sense. But that doesn't change the fact that much of American Catholicism can still be very dogmatic, very closed off, very conservative, just as much as some parts of evangelicalism are.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's kind of a both and, right? Like I do agree that, like, in some ways institutionally and worldwide, I view Catholicism as like more organic, so it can kind of grow and change with culture a little easier than evangelicalism, because evangelicalism is kind of a pocket of a subculture, so
Yep.
it can't really like adapt in kind of this its boundaries can't expand that much, or else it ceases to be what it is. So whereas Catholicism can, because it is so broad.
Exactly. And that, not to go on a tangent, but I wanted to ask you, because it segues into this perfectly. Have you ever read the book, The Poisonwood Bible?
I have not, no.
It deals with basically exactly what you just described, because it's about a family of evangelical missionaries from Georgia that go to Africa and try to convert some native people there, and they're just not able to adapt it to a different culture at all. And I think there's some truth to that, in the sense that sometimes, evangelicalism can leave a stamp of it can just kind of be indelibly American, especially since the majority of evangelical missionaries in the world, I think, are coming out of America. Catholicism is a lot more comfortable with cultural differences and cultural adaptations. And when you go to places where Catholicism is really a part of the culture, like, Colombia or Italy or the Philippines, you'll see something that's a lot more ingrained with the way the people live there, and can kind of reflect the people around them a little bit better. And that's at least one thing I would say is a strength to Catholicism.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'll have to look up that book. That looks very interesting to me for many reasons.
I think you would really enjoy that book.
Yeah, I'll definitely give it a read. What's funny though is often, I have a podcast and a book both titled The Cult of Christianity, right? And so people a lot of the time they'll go, "Oh, did you grow up Catholic?" Or like they'll assume something about Catholicism. And at first this struck me as odd, but the more I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe this is because like modern day, when we kind of associate the word cult with like rituals, or like the idea of people like doing something ritualistic, with candles around or something. And I actually do believe that, repetitive rituals can absolutely be a tool for cultists. But I don't really think that Catholicism, it's certainly not more cultish than evangelicalism. I don't think that. Do you think they're equally susceptible to being cult-like, or do you think evangelicalism is more cultish?
That's a difficult question. I think maybe it goes back to that institutional thing where, because of, at least, with the leadership of the church that we have now with someone like Pope Francis, makes it harder. But nevertheless, there are massively cultish Catholic subgroups, particularly in the United States, that are absolutely just as strange as you would find in the most strange corners of evangelicalism. And a lot of those people are people that define themselves specifically in opposition to, for instance, Pope Francis and his leadership vision for the church. So there's a lot of, they'll call themselves trads or Catholic traditionalists. Again, I'm not meaning to defame anyone. I'm not trying to say that everybody that ever calls themselves that is a cult-like person. But it's undeniable that in the more traditional parts of American Catholicism, there can be some really strange, sort of bizarre stuff. You can get a lot of conspiracy theories. Catholics have a particular fascination with. You can find a lot of Marian apparition conspiracy theories in Catholicism, and there can be a lot of those sort of weird corners where things kind of lurk. But it's definitely more of a subculture, because that kind of thing is not something that's typically going to be supported by a bishop or by the higher echelons of the Catholic hierarchy. But it definitely is a powerful force in American Catholicism, this sort of traditional wing of the church that can be a little bit much sometimes.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty honest answer to me. I'll challenge you just a little bit more on it before we get out of here. Because so people ask me, well, what do you mean by the word cult a lot, right? And sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I mean whatever I want that day. But no, what I actually do mean. So there's indicators, and then there's more. I have more indicators than like a hard fast definition. So I'm like, my 3 alliterative indicators are control, contain, convert. So I'm like, are they trying to control people? Are they containing people? And are they encouraging conversionism or have some sort of relationship with conversionism? Those are indicators. But another indicator I talk about a lot is just this idea of leaders and followers. And so what strikes me more about the Catholic Church is, like you were alluding to earlier, that like hard line distinction between leaders and followers. Do you think that plays into any kind of cult-like behavior, or am I just assuming that based on my experience?
No, I think it does. So, there's a word that Catholics sometimes use, and Pope Francis uses it as a derogatory word, which is clericalism, which is this sort of mentality where people, because of that hard distinction between, um, the laity and the priest, that there becomes this huge deference to the priest, where they become this powerful figure that can kind of get away with anything, and that sort of plays into a lot of the foundations for why the sex abuse scandal happened in Catholicism to begin with, because there was too much deference to priests because of that distinction, where they could kind of get away with manipulating people and sort of doing whatever they wanted, because that religious distinction created such a presumption of their holiness, of their authority, that it kind of created it created the ability of priests to have their own little cult, so where a priest could go into a parish and kind of try to control the people in there. But if you look at it from a wider perspective, if I forget, what were the three things you said again? It was control or conversion. Refresh my memory.
Control, contain, convert.
Control, contain, convert. Yeah, but for the church, kind of where it is right now, the control is not a word that can be easily applied to the Catholic Church right now, and I'll compare it with kind of what we experienced at the sort of the evangelical Protestant church that we were a part of. When we were there, I know you've relayed stories where the elders of the church were sitting you down for conversations, and we're trying to exercise influence over you to get you back on the right path, and there's there's this idea where they can excommunicate people for not doing the right thing. That kind of thing is not really something you will see in the Catholic Church really in the 21st century. Catholics kind of, even though there's this teaching and it's echoed, individual Catholics kind of just do what they want. Like if you look at surveys of Catholics, not very many Catholics in America follow the church teaching very well. Catholics tend, if they're Catholic, they tend to view participation in the church as their right. And, there are many Catholics who, huge numbers who have no problem participating in the church's rituals, even though they might believe that abortion is morally acceptable, or they many other divergences. And so it's hard to apply the word control to the Catholic Church when there's just so much of people just really do what they want in the American Catholic Church, and the hierarchy never really tries to control people in the same kind of way. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I've certainly heard stories of Catholic churches being pretty overbearing, but I will acknowledge that structurally it is a very different thing.
Yeah, and I will agree with you. I don't want to I know that there are many priests who have tried to control people, so I don't want to deny that there are a lot of people in the church out there who will try to control people, but I just wanted to try to affirm that there's an entire sort of cafeteria Catholic, as it were, culture, where it's not at all abnormal for people to sort of have their own opinions, but continue to participate in Catholic liturgical life. And it would be considered by most people pretty bizarre to see a priest trying to sort of exercise levels of control over people, even though I don't deny and would absolutely affirm that there are many priests who do try to do that and do things like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because it's almost like here's a way you could, here's kind of a joke that you could tell to illustrate the differences. You can't go to an evangelical church for more than 2 weeks without 3 people knowing your name. You can go to a Catholic church for 2 years, and the person you've sat next to might not know your name.
That is 100% true.
Yeah, so the element of like kind of this mafia family or whatever, like that you kind of get the feeling of in evangelicalism, that's not really present in Catholicism from my estimation.
Exactly. And part of the reason is just because of kind of size differences. Because, I mean, the kind of churches that you and me were a part of, that is very much a subculture. There's not like a big megatropolis city that I can think of that's 40% Reformed Presbyterian. It's more of a sort of a smaller thing. But, there are places, even in America, like you think of a place like Boston, Massachusetts, right? That's a very liberal city, a very large city that, despite being very liberal and very large, is also a very, very Catholic city. And so because of the just how widespread it is, and because often Catholic areas are very, very liberal, like Boston, Massachusetts, a very democratic state, there's a certain ethos that sort of comes out of that, where it's just very common for that level of sort of, pick and choosing in Catholicism. There's a whole culture kind of involved in that.
Yeah. So that makes sense why you're able to, not dissociate from Catholicism completely, even where you might differ from the mainstream or whatever.
Right.
That makes sense that you're like, I'm not part of a cult. I'm not sure if you are or not. I'm still wrestling through my perspective on the Catholic Church. But I can certainly say, obviously, the cult, quote unquote, quoting myself, that I'm most concerned with is definitely white American evangelicalism.
Right.
And where my critiques overlap to other branches of Christianity, yay, I'm more right than I mean to be. But that's definitely the group I'm more concerned with myself.
That's understandable, especially given the state of American politics and the impact that evangelicals often have over it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Patrick, this is the time I usually ask someone to plug away or mention a charity, but for you, I thought it might be fun to ask, are there any good books you would recommend for someone interested in these topics?
Even though this is kind of outside the topic of what we've been talking about exactly, but it does play into it in the sense of it goes back to wanting a Christianity that is more merciful, more tolerant. There's a book by a theologian named David Bentley Hart, and the title of the book is quote, "That All Shall Be Saved," unquote. I would recommend that because, as I mentioned earlier, I love universalism, and so I can't refuse an opportunity to plug for something universalistic. If we're thinking about something specifically more in line of Catholicism, I would if you want a book that presents sort of Christianity or specifically Catholicism in a more positive light, I would probably recommend a book called Alive in God, A Christian Imagination by Timothy Radcliffe. Or if not that, anything Pope Francis writes.
Awesome. Yeah, I knew it wouldn't disappoint. I knew you'd have something ready to go. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on. It was good to catch up and also just great to hear your thoughts. And you definitely helped me out with this. You spoke well to these issues, much better than I could have.
Oh, absolutely. I loved it. And so thank you very much for having me on. And anytime you want me back on, just give me a shout.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, listener, for stopping by. I'll talk to you all soon. If you wish to learn more about what's going on in my life or wish to purchase my book, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, please continue to listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for additional content. For only $5 a month, you'll have access to 2 additional shows, Parsing Propaganda, where I review and critique Christian content, and Art, where we try some amateur religious trauma therapy. Every subscriber becomes a part of something bigger than this podcast, as we endeavor to hold churches accountable, speak the truth boldly, and most importantly, love others despite our pain. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.